It all started with a post that seemed designed not to debate policy or respond to a legislative idea, but to strike a nerve. The kind of message that doesn't aim to elevate conversation, only to provoke. It was personal, biting, and unmistakably targeted. Aimed directly at Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, the post didn't hold back. It mocked everything from her physical appearance to her intelligence, even implying she had no business being in Congress in the first place. The tone was unmistakably mean-spirited, dripping with condescension, and the kind of language that was less about disagreement, and more about demeaning someone publicly. The post specifically took jabs at her wigs, suggesting that she was more focused on her next hairstyle than on writing laws. That comment alone drew intense backlash across platforms. People quickly pointed out the obvious, how often appearance, especially for women in politics, becomes the low-hanging fruit of attack. But this wasn't just about fashion or choices in personal style. It was a deeper signal, a way of undermining her seriousness as a legislator, a way of saying, "You don't belong here," without ever having to use those exact words. Then came the comment about her intelligence. In the post, she was labeled low IQ, a phrase that's been weaponized before, but one that still carries a punch when used against black women in positions of power. It wasn't just insulting, it played into stereotypes that have long been used to question the competence of women of color, regardless of their credentials or accomplishments. For Crockett, who earned her law degree and spent years as a public defender before running for office, the jab didn't touch reality, but it touched something more important: the perception game, that dangerous territory where credibility is often linked more to image than to substance. And then, as if to double down, the post claimed she was one of the worst ever elected. That statement, vague and unverifiable as it was, carried weight simply because of the reach it had. Coming from a figure with a massive platform, followed by millions, it immediately created a narrative, not just about Crockett's qualifications, but about her value as a public servant. It painted her as ineffective, unintelligent, and unworthy, without offering any actual policy, critique, or examples of her supposed failures. It was pure performance, the kind that weaponizes influence and visibility instead of facts. But perhaps, what made the post truly shocking wasn't just what was said, it was when and how it was said. It didn't come after a fiery debate on the House floor. It wasn't a response to a high-profile speech. It came out of nowhere, unprovoked, almost as if Crockett's rising visibility alone had struck a nerve. As if her presence, her voice, her increasing relevance had become enough of a threat to warrant a public takedown. And the internet noticed. Social media lit up almost immediately. People from across the political spectrum began discussing the post. Supporters of Crockett rallied in defense, while even some of her critics questioned the need for such a personal attack. Journalists began dissecting the language, pointing out the recurring pattern of targeted insults, especially when it came to women, especially black women, who challenged dominant narratives. Within hours, hashtags with Crockett's name began trending, not because she had done anything outrageous, but because she had become the latest target in a public attempt to silence through ridicule. What this post did, intentionally or not, was shine a spotlight on an old strategy. When you can't attack the argument, attack the person. And when the person is a woman of color and power, the attacks almost always follow a familiar formula. Question her looks, doubt her intelligence, dismiss her accomplishments. The fact that this pattern played out again, in broad daylight, and on a massive platform, was not just shocking, it was revealing. It showed that even in 2025, power still finds ways to belittle what it fears, especially when it sees that power rising in someone unexpected. Jasmine Crockett didn't respond with anger. That's what made her reaction so effective. When asked on live television if she had seen the post, she simply nodded, her face calm, her tone measured. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't take the bait. She didn't stoop to the level of personal insult. What she did instead was hold her ground with quiet confidence, and let the facts speak louder than the attack. She began by acknowledging the post, not ignoring it. She didn't pretend it didn't hurt or brush it off as irrelevant, but she also didn't allow it to control her. With deliberate clarity, she said, "When a man who is facing 91 felony counts has the time to comment on my hair and my intelligence, it says far more about him than me." The words landed heavily, not because they were dramatic, but because they were true. The juxtaposition was undeniable. One person is facing serious criminal charges, and yet he's taking time to mock a sitting member of Congress over her appearance. She didn't insult him. She didn't name Ka. She didn't dive into the mud, and in doing so, she stayed above it. That's what made the moment resonate. Crockett's approach wasn't designed for viral attention, though it got it anyway. It was designed to speak to something bigger, the idea that dignity matters, that public service should not be reduced to reality show level jabs, that a lawmaker's worth is not defined by whether she wears a wig, but by whether she fights for her district, and that's exactly what Crockett reminded everyone she was doing. She took the moment, which could have easily spiraled into a war of words, and used it as a chance to redirect attention to her work. She made it clear she wasn't elected to entertain or get into social media spats. She was elected to read legislation, write policy, and represent real people who are tired of distractions masquerading as leadership. Asterisk, she even said, pointedly, "I don't need cue cards." It was a subtle but sharp reference to the fact that during public appearances, he has often been seen relying heavily on prepared notes, sometimes even struggling to stay on message. Crockett, a former public defender and trial lawyer, reminded viewers that she speaks from what she knows, not what she's told to say, and she didn't have to scream it. Her poise did the talking. Asterisk, what made her response stand out was how controlled it was. Many politicians understandably might have fired back with a list of counterinsults, but Crockett didn't see the need. She understood that responding with grace doesn't mean staying silent. It means choosing your words carefully. And in choosing not to retaliate personally, she exposed just how empty the original post really was. It wasn't based on policy. It wasn't a critique of her voting record or her positions. It was a personal attack, and nothing more. She made that obvious without having to say it outright. Asterisk, instead of defending her intelligence, she let her record do it for her. Instead of listing her degrees or rattling off accomplishments, she focused on the absurdity of someone facing multiple indictments trying to question her credibility. The contrast was so stark that she didn't have to embellish it. She just laid it bare and trusted viewers to see the truth for themselves. Asterisk. The way she carried herself sent a message. She wasn't shaken, and she wasn't going to be sidetracked. She had work to do, and she wasn't going to be pulled into a spectacle. It was a move that revealed both maturity and strategy. Crockett knew the cameras were on. She knew the clip would travel far beyond that night's broadcast, and she made a choice, not to escalate, but to elevate. Asterisk, her calm demeanor didn't signal weakness. On the contrary, it revealed a different kind of strength, the kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard, the kind that doesn't chase validation, the kind that recognizes what real leadership looks like. In that moment, she embodied it. Not just for her constituents, but for anyone watching who's tired of politics turning into personality wars. Asterisk. In the middle of the chaos that followed the viral post targeting her, Jasmine Crockett made a conscious decision. She wasn't going to let the conversation stay focused on petty insults. She saw through the distraction, and instead of giving it more oxygen, she did what so many politicians fail to do in moments like this. She redirected. Crockett used her platform, not to retaliate, but to talk about something that actually mattered, the job she was elected to do. Asterisk. When asked whether she wanted to keep going with her response, she pivoted. Not dramatically, not with some clever clapback, but with a quiet insistence on substance over noise. She said, "People in my district aren't waking up worried about what wigs I wear. They're worried about housing. They're worried about healthcare. They're worried about their kids making it home safe from school." That was the shift. And in that moment, she didn't just speak for herself. She spoke for thousands of people who are exhausted with showmanship in politics, tired of being used as props in someone else's ego-driven spectacle. Asterisk. The post from him was an obvious attempt to bait her, to get a reaction that could be clipped, mocked, or turned into yet another talking point. It was about personal ego, not policy, but Crockett refused to play that game. Instead, she did something that shook up the usual script. She challenged the very premise of the attack. Why, she asked implicitly, would a former president, a man who once held the highest office in the land, spend his time obsessing over a congresswoman's hairstyle instead of focusing on the pressing issues the country faces? Asterisk. She made it clear that her priorities were not going to be derailed by someone else's insecurities or social media tantrums. Her focus, she reminded viewers, was on the legislation that affects people's lives. And when she said, "I actually read legislation," it wasn't just a dig, it was a statement of purpose. She was calling attention to the fact that public service isn't supposed to be about charisma or showboating. It's supposed to be about hard, often unglamorous work, reading bills, sitting through committee hearings, advocating for constituents, and she was doing that work while he was online. Typing out personal attacks. Asterisk. The deeper message she delivered was that leadership isn't about attention, it's about accountability. She held up a mirror, not just to him, but to the entire system that rewards outrage and spectacle over results. By not engaging in a tit-for-tat exchange, Crockett reminded everyone that not all battles are worth fighting on someone else's terms. Some are won by refusing to be pulled off course. Asterisk. And that's what made her response so sharp, even though it was soft-spoken. She exposed the emptiness of the insult not by denying it, but by showing how little it mattered in the bigger picture. She spoke about policy, about the needs of her district, and about the real work of governance. That's where she planted her feet, and she didn't budge. Asterisk. It was especially striking because it stood in contrast to a political culture that often rewards those who shout the loudest. Crockett didn't need to shout. Her refusal to engage in the petty, the performative, or the personal said more than any comeback ever could. She wasn't trying to win a Twitter fight. She was doing something more impactful, reminding the public that leadership means keeping your eyes on the work, even when the noise gets loud. Asterisk. And when she said, maybe he should spend more time preparing for court, it was the one line that punctured the narrative completely. It redirected attention from her appearance, her voice, her identity, all the things that had been attacked, and instead put the focus squarely on his accountability. That wasn't an insult, that was a fact. A reality check wrapped in calm delivery. Asterisk. She didn't try to one-up him. She didn't try to go viral. She simply did what many viewers quietly wish more elected officials would do, take the high road without giving up ground. In doing so, Jasmine Crockett reminded the country that politics doesn't have to be about personality wars. It can be about purpose. Asterisk. The reaction to Jasmine Crockett's response was swift and overwhelming. Within hours of her appearance on MSNBC, the clip was circulating across social media platforms. People from all walks of life, progressives, moderates, even a few conservatives, began to weigh in, and a clear pattern emerged. Her composure, not her outrage, was what stunned viewers the most. It wasn't the kind of moment that came with shouting or slamming a desk. It was the kind that landed like a quiet punch, the kind that makes people go back and replay it, just to absorb how calm and cutting it really was. Asterisk. She didn't come on TV to make headlines. In fact, her scheduled appearance was supposed to center around education, funding, and legislative strategy. But the moment she was asked about the post attacking her, she didn't duck the question. She didn't flinch. She answered firmly, clearly, and without theatrics. That's what caught people off guard. They were expecting a fiery exchange, maybe some shouting, or even a sarcastic comeback. Instead, she gave them something rare, grace under pressure. Asterisk. She addressed the post directly, pointing out the absurdity of someone with 91 felony counts using his platform to mock her hair, her intelligence, and her place in Congress. But she didn't linger there. She refused to let the insult define the narrative. Viewers watched as she methodically reframed the moment, turning a petty attack into a conversation about dignity, credibility, and priorities. In a political era where outrage often drowns out substance, her restraint felt like a revelation. Asterisk. That contrast didn't go unnoticed. The same platforms that usually thrive on loud back and forths were suddenly buzzing with commentary about how controlled and confident she remained. Journalists posted thoughtful breakdowns of her response. Political analysts highlighted her ability to neutralize the insult without giving it power. Even some commentators who had been critical of her in the past found themselves nodding in respect, not necessarily because they agreed with her politics, but because they recognized leadership when they saw it. Asterisk. And perhaps most telling of all was what didn't happen. He didn't post about her again for weeks. That silence was louder than anything else. Normally, a reaction like hers would spark another round of insults, a return volley aimed at reigniting the feud. But instead, there was nothing. No comeback, no follow-up attack, just silence. Because in a way, Crockett had removed the oxygen from the fire. She didn't just respond to him, she exposed the weakness in his strategy. Asterisk. The public recognized that people didn't share the clip because it was theatrical, they shared it because it felt real, authentic. A woman standing on live television, holding her ground, refusing to be reduced to someone's punchline. She didn't try to be clever. She didn't need to prove her intelligence by tearing someone down. She proved it by standing tall, even while being unfairly targeted. Asterisk. The reaction extended beyond just social media. Local papers in her district ran editorials praising her poise. Columnists described her as unflappable and focused. Constituents shared their pride, posting messages that said things like, "This is why we elected her, and that's how you handle a bully." The praise wasn't just about her words, it was about her clarity. People were tired of the spectacle. They wanted someone who could cut through it, and she did. Asterisk. What Crockett showed that night, and in the days that followed, is that power isn't always about dominating a room. Sometimes, it's about refusing to be pulled into someone else's drama. She never gave the insult more value than it deserved. She held up her record, her work, and her principles, and that was more than enough. Asterisk. While many politicians would have used the moment to launch their own tirade, Crockett chose something far more difficult: discipline. And in doing so, she left a stronger impression than any insult ever could. Asterisk. Jasmine Crockett's handling of the situation wasn't just a moment of personal strength. It was a reminder of what political leadership can look like when grounded in purpose rather than performance. She didn't respond to the insult with another insult. She didn't posture or grandstand. She simply held the line calmly, intelligently, and with focus. That's what made it so impactful. In an age where outrage often dominates headlines, Crockett gave people something different: substance. And in doing so, she won far more than a viral moment. She earned credibility with a much wider audience. Asterisk. The post aimed at her was meant to belittle, to embarrass, to shake her confidence. But it backfired. It exposed the kind of insecurity that lashes out when challenged by rising voices. Rather than diminish her, it amplified her. And Crockett, instead of reacting emotionally, used it as a moment to stand taller, not just for herself, but for anyone who's ever been told they don't belong in the room. She reminded everyone that grace under fire is more powerful than volume, that facts carry more weight than personal jabs, and that doing the work, quietly, steadily, and with integrity speaks louder than 1,000 insults shouted online. Asterisk. What made her response resonate wasn't that it was dramatic, but that it was grounded. It felt honest, unscripted, and above all, real. People saw themselves in her composure. They saw someone who had been targeted unfairly and still refused to bend. In that moment, she didn't just defend herself. She modeled how to lead under pressure. Asterisk. Even those who might disagree with her politically found something to respect in the way she handled it. That's not an easy thing to achieve in today's climate. But Crockett didn't try to be universally liked. She didn't try to spin or overreach. She simply told the truth about her work, her priorities, and her refusal to be distracted by noise. Asterisk. In the end, it wasn't just a story about a social media post. It was a story about how a leader chooses to respond when they're under attack. And Crockett made a choice that many in Washington struggle with. She stayed focused on the people she represents, not the person trying to pull her off course. That choice didn't just earn her a few headlines. It solidified her standing as someone who can handle pressure, push back when necessary, and still keep her eyes on the mission. Asterisk. In politics, moments like these are revealing. They show us who's in it for the attention and who's in it for the responsibility. Jasmine Crockett showed us the difference, and for many watching,